Okay, hey guys. So we're now here to do the Britain essay pack, which Peter has been delighting in 13 years of conservative hegemony that he's been
Well,
reading through.
I don't know what that's meant to suggest, James. I
That
don't,
your politics is somewhat slightly more
as,
than mine, which
as
I
an
think.
educator, I strive for neutrality.
Mm, yeah, well, this course was totally neutral, obviously, starting in 1951 and ending in 1997, not at all. Politically motivated, cutting off Attlee and cutting off Blair, who I think are two probably quite important prime ministers to know about.
Well, nothing's perfect in this world.
No, but I mean, come on. There's something's wrong with that. Because we do Churchill up to the end of the war and then we just skip Attlee and start 51.
Oh, you know, can't do everything. All right,
No, the
so
man who founded the welfare state. Like, it's not like
yeah,
skipping
that's true.
Callahan or something, these like, proper prime ministers. All right. So the first question, we're going to go through the essay pack as we did last time with American Rev. So I'll take the lead on it and I'll run through the main points and Peter will add bits and then we'll debate our answers to the questions. The first essay in the essay pack is why did the Conservatives win the 1951 election? So again, you can break these down into multiple factors. Britain, if you're running out of time from the source question, you can turn them into like 4 paragraph essays. But in general, and again, I don't want students to feel like these essay packs are like prisons. You can use your own factors for any of these. And when we get to some of the other ones later on, where I feel there should be better, there could be other factors they could use. I'll emphasize that. With this one, obviously, the main factors are like Labour weakness, Conservative strength in the electoral system. Usually, it's always going to be one for Labour, one for Conservative, and something else for any of the election essays, because they have obviously they can have. Usually, this in Britain, they have essays either on how well did a prime minister do X, so like how successful were they, or like basically why did one party win a certain election. So it's mostly focused on elections and their social, political, and economic running of the country. Um, so with this one, obviously, the one factor is Labour weakness. So problem for Labour, they'd been under Attlee. Obviously, Attlee had had a very successful introduction of the welfare state, had brought in the Beveridge report, had implemented everything, and had changed basically the whole country. So Attlee basically created the post-war consensus, post-war consensus being made up of 4 pillars, which was basically like Keynesian economics, the idea of tax and spend. So higher taxes, higher spending to like you spend your way out of economic problems. Um, the idea of nationalization, which split the Labour Party in a little bit because the left wing of the Labour Party wanted to nationalize everything, and the right wing, more moderate wing of the Labour Party wanted to nationalize like what they would call like essential institutions like coal, gas, electricity, railways, anything that's on infrastructure would run the country. But that was the second pillar. Third pillar was the right for trade unions to exist and to negotiate with the trade unions. Obviously, again, the left wing of the Labour Party was more keen to negotiate more with trade unions than the right wing of the Labour Party, but that kind of split things. And why is my brain gone blank on the last factor? What is the last factor? The welfare state, so creation of the welfare state. So obviously creation of the National Health Service, expanding free education for people and basically creating the foundations of the country we have today. And basically that post-war consensus lasts all the way up until Thatcher, where she breaks it. And now we are currently living in a Thatcherite consensus, which we'll get to when we deal with Thatcher. So Labour had implemented all that. They've been popular. They've been brought in. They've done a good job running the country domestically during World War II. Attlee had been running it while Churchill was running the war effort. Churchill had surprisingly lost the election in 45. Labour had come in and they were now like looking to move on to a second term. So why did they go from a massive landslide victory in 45 to losing the 51 election? A number of factors. So in terms of Labour weakness, there was austerity, rationing, and high taxation still existed. So a lot of people were unhappy with that. As the left-wing party, they assumed it would have come out. And you're now looking 6 years after the war, and there's still rationing around, and there's no red meat or very limited red meats now. So like what people would accept in wartime, they're struggling to understand why 6 years after the war they still have to live without the decent food, basically. And if you want to jump in on anything, Peter, by the way, just jump in, or you can do it at the end of the fact, whichever you want to do. Another problem
Sure.
was entry into the Korean War. So like obviously they hadn't wanted to continue with wars after World War II, and the fact that Labour brought them into yet another war, obviously backing up the Americans and aiming to end the spread of communism. So Attlee had to go in to support Truman. But the left wing of the Labour Party is always going to be basically hostile to any wars of any kind. And like the idea of spending money on a military campaign when you can't eat meat at home didn't sit very well with the population in the UK. Uh, the Labour Party was divided. between the left and the right. That's kind of an answer to absolutely any election because the Labour Party is always divided between left and right. And Attlee had managed to unify them. But even with Attlee, even after he won his landslide election, there were members of the Labour Party that had planned to go the day after Attlee won to the King to get him to remove Attlee. I was like, that's how divided the Labour Party is. And it's quite hard to get them. When they're united, they win elections. When they're divided, they lose them generally. Party was quite exhausted. They'd been, running the country because they'd been running the domestic part of the country all the way through World War II as well, and then dealing with a very difficult point. They managed to look like tired. Attlee was seen as boring and dull. That was true even when he won in 45. It was just like that was the right man for the time. And they'd introduced the NHS charges on glasses and for the dentists because originally it had all been free, but they'd ended up rolling that back because they couldn't afford to pay for everything basically. So all of these things kind of undermined it, and Labour really wasn't offering anything fresh and new. So they'd introduced the welfare state, but then as always with the electorate, it's kind of like, yeah, and now what? What next? Anything else you want to add on that for Labour weakness?
That's more or less that's what I got. That's pretty. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
gleaned from the book.
Okay. And then on the Conservative strength side, then, use the second factor. So Conservatives have been beaten. That was a shock. Churchill couldn't believe that having effectively almost won a war, he was voted out. Um, but now in 51, it was different. Churchill would remain leader of the party. He was more a figurehead at this point, though. He appointed a lot of really talented people under him. So he had like Rab Butler as his shadow chancellor. He had Macmillan in housing, Eden in foreign policy. So one thing Churchill's always been pretty good at is identifying talent, I think, and putting them in positions.
That's
Um,
hard to do.
it
You
is.
can't underestimate that.
Yeah, I think it's a good skill. He did genuinely appoint good people, you know what I mean? Which is also for a man with such a colossal ego, it's quite impressive because usually quite often egotistical leaders don't do that. But he would put that aside, you know what I mean? He didn't care if he didn't like someone if they did the job really
Well,
well.
usually the temptation is to do the opposite, is to
Yeah.
appoint weak people around you so that they're not a threat to your position.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's weird because he managed to command loyalty from them, but he had strong people. I mean, how many conservative leaders would have let the Labour Party run the domestic side when he knew they were just Attlee was better at doing it? And, I mean, and appointing people that I mean, if you look at his big cabinet appointees, it's like Macmillan and Eden both went on to become prime minister after him.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, for various levels of success. That's what we'll talk about today. But like, they both made it in as prime minister. And Rab Butler is considered quite often to be the highest quality British politician who didn't make it to be prime minister.
Can I give you my favorite conservative strength?
Yeah, what with that
It's
that Churchill
not
picked.
Churchill. Well, not Churchill. The slogan "More red meat." I
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
That's a solid slogan.
yes. More red meat, less red commies. Like, so to counter rationing. Yes, I mean, of course, the Conservative Party realized they were putting in like what needed to be done. So like they looked at, as the Conservatives are usually quite apt at doing, they looked at where Labour was unpopular and they went, we'll just offer that. Like, but what was really masterminding the Conservative strength was Rab Butler basically agreeing to continue all of the post-war consensus. Because I think if they hadn't agreed to the post-war consensus, the four planks that was really popular with Labour, I don't think they'd have got in. But what the
Yeah, that's one
Conservatives,
of the
yeah,
that's one of the surprising things, I think, is the degree to which the Conservatives ran the popular policies of Labor,
yeah,
yet without the divisions and the problems in the Labor Party. That
no,
seems rather a clever thing to do, and there's something rather unexpected. You wouldn't necessarily think that the Tories, particularly post Thatcher,
yeah.
were were as instrumental in keeping up the welfare state as the Labor Party, essentially. But
Yeah,
that's the case.
yeah. They were living in Attlee as well. Basically, Attlee had set the template and the Conservatives just adopted it. In the same way that Blair just didn't challenge Thatcherism. He just said, all right,
Yeah,
XYZ works from Thatcher, we'll keep that and we'll get rid of the bits that aren't working and like fix them. And then we'll so basically like the Conservatives were like, we'll keep the welfare state, but we'll make the country run more efficiently. And Labour said, we'll keep Thatcher's economic policies, but we'll make the country be more humane.
right, right.
And so that's why we're still living in Thatcher's world. And again, I think we're kind of in the equivalent of the 60s, 70s, not to jump around too much in the modern Britain. I think we're going to end up with a new Thatcher, but I think it's going to be a Thatcher of the left. I don't know how it's going to manifest itself, but My money, if I want to make a prediction, let's see where it goes. My money's on the current education secretary being the one to make the move. I'm quite impressed with. I don't agree with everything she does, but the same with Thatcher. But I think she's got a strong personality. I think she can do it. I don't think it's going to be Starmer, but you never know. Maybe he gets it from the Ukraine situation. So
All
anyway,
right.
so Churchill's still popular at this time. Also, because the Korean War started, the Cold War's begun at this point. Obviously, Churchill's launched his like Iron Curtain speech. And because the Cold War is on, people are slightly afraid. The Korean War is running. And when you've got a war on, Churchill's wartime leadership looks more appealing than when you're in what was originally after 1945, the post-war like peace dividend that they gave to Attlee. So I think in that sense, Churchill's popularity was still there. Even though he'd lost in 45, it was more like they didn't see him as the right man for the job. And now that Rab Butler has basically said, we're going to keep all of the things you like about Labour and we're going to agree to all of this, because Churchill had actually not wanted to implement the full Beveridge report. So Attlee did it, and then the Conservatives accepted it. So the fact that Rab Butler did that, but then and then that coined obviously Butskillism, which is like that Gateskill was the Labour chancellor and from the right wing of his party, and Butler was the Conservative chancellor from the left wing of his party. And so basically their economic policies totally overlapped, which then allowed the Conservatives to dominate. Because if Labour's not offering anything different and things are working, why would you change? And that was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
great skill was Butler taking on the clothing of the Labour Party, the effective ones. He realised the country was a different place, but doing it better basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay. So
yeah, go on, sorry.
so that's those were conservative strengths.
Oh yeah, there's a few more as well, but I'll go. I'll
Hmm.
just give you that. But yeah, that was definitely. I think the biggest conservative strength was set basically agreeing to the post-war consensus. Because I think if they hadn't done that, they wouldn't have got in. And then they can almost say like Labour's betraying it because raising the charges on the glasses and dentistry would look really, really bad. They
Yeah.
promised to build 300,000 homes a year, put Macmillan in charge of that. Labour was only building 200,000, and Macmillan actually beat that. We could do without Macmillan now. We've got a housing problem in England. We could do with a Macmillan like figure to come in and build loads of houses.
Are
Um,
they what kind of houses were they, James? Are they those horrible, those kind of ugly modernist
in the 30s,
sort
I
of
reckon they're 50s, sorry, I don't know, 1950s UK housing. Let's look.
sort of brutalist?
I would have thought it was
Maybe that was
the
a little bit later
semi-detached
on,
ones. Yeah, no, the semi-detached,
like
like the
a.
standard ones you see that everyone lives in that I grew up in.
Oh, okay, okay.
Semi-detached and standard housing, seemingly looking at the photos. I mean,
It
I
was
just Google image it. It's not exactly scientific research, but like looking at it, it looks like the houses that I grew up in. So more or less.
fair enough. Okay,
No,
and that
I
was
think the brutalist monstrosities were created in the 60s and 70s.
60s. Yeah, exactly. A bit later on.
Yeah,
Okay.
ugly Soviet era concrete monstrosities like the Barbican. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so they promised to build the houses. Labour was only building 200,000. There was a housing crisis. So again, what they were really good is identifying where Labour was struggling with the electorate, where it was unpopular, like the war, the other bits, and then targeting that to try and win it. They had new, young, and talented politicians like Reginald Maudling. They had obviously like Butler in, and like I said, in Chancellor, Eden in foreign policy, Macmillan in housing. So they had quite a high power team. You know what I mean? And I think it's like if you look at it, it's similar to like when you've got a prime minister who's got a really strong team around them, then they can achieve a lot. And I think that's what the mistake some prime ministers who are maybe weaker in character do, and not appointing people who can do the job properly. And Lord Walton had come in and reformed the party finances in the local organisation. They'd been out campaigned by Labour on the ground campaign in 1945, so they had to turn that round and get back on top of it. So all of those things I think were Conservative strengths. Do you want to add anything else on that one?
No, apart from the more red meat, my favorite. So that was the
So what, do you want to
rationing.
explain why your more red meat is such a
Well, I I listened to an episode on a different podcast
yeah,
about the British love of roast beef,
yeah.
which the French obviously think is a big stereotype because they call British roast beefs, right?
Do you know where that
That's
comes
an
from?
old
I
name.
thought it was to do with food. It's not. Do you know where the origin of that is?
No,
Roast beef, it's because when we go to the beach, we're so pale that we go red, and so we look like roast beef.
really? No, but
That's what
I
I
don't think
heard. I heard it
that's.
was from burning on the beach.
No, I think it's no, it's because British people ate beef all the time,
We
breakfast,
do.
lunch, and dinner,
We still do.
cold, hot, in
Yeah.
fact, with gravy.
Um,
So anyway, so that's the winner. So no,
yeah.
no more rationing, no
Yeah.
alternative to austerity, I
Yeah.
guess.
Who wants to eat spam and corned beef when the war is over? No one. And like I said, I think that was a big problem in the Korean War of them paying for a war and the soldiers abroad when they didn't really have it, I think is an issue.
Do you eat spam, James?
No, who would?
Do you know anybody that does?
Probably.
Well, I
I'm
mean,
not sure they would. I'm not sure they would publicly just go
it's not
around.
something you publicly admit
No,
to.
it's not like Marmite where you've got to defend your preferences for something that's divisive. Um, I was
We'll get to
introducing
Marmite
I
later.
was introducing people to Marmite this morning before this podcast. It's the joys of eating Marmite, the proper
How
one.
are how are you doing that?
But 'cause you've got to mix it with butter. Like people like too many people put it like people
Slap it on.
when yeah when they're from other countries slap it on. I said that's like putting wasabi
I
on.
know we have that problem in this country
Yeah,
with
with
Vegemite,
Vegemite. Yeah, no, just
but we'll politely skip the debate between
yeah.
Vegemite and Marmite
I
for
prefer
now. And
Vegemite, so I concede automatically. It's
oh,
much
look at that!
yeah.
Oh,
No,
that was much easier than I thought.
no, I'm not going to
Okay.
defend. Vegemite's good. Anyways, we're way
All
off
right.
topic now, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
true. Red
we've
meat was.
kind
This is why
of.
food was important in that election. All right, and the last one is the electoral system. So, problem is the first past the post system produces governments that aren't always popular. So, in 1945, Labour had to get 30,522 votes per seat. In 1951, 47,283, and that was a big difference. So, like Labour got um, so 200,000 more votes for Labour, but 26 fewer seats. So even though they got more votes, they got less seats than before. So, and the Labour Party actually got higher votes, not more votes than the Conservatives. So this is why the electoral system is quite important, because in a proportional representation system, Attlee would have won that election.
Yeah.
The system itself
So
is one of
so
the
this is first past the post, right?
yeah, because the first past the post in general gives an inbuilt majority to the Conservative Party because the left-wing voters are more divided. Although now with reform, I'm not sure that's the case anymore. Mm.
Yeah, that means so it means that, for example, Labor wins. They could win
Look,
more in raw number in
yeah, they
state
won the
seats.
popular vote by
They
200.
could,
Yeah.
but in other seats that are rather divided, then they lose out to the Conservatives, the marginal seats.
Yep. I should probably put
Yeah,
up the exact data on this one. So yeah, so Labour got 13,948,000 votes, Conservatives 13,717,000, but the Conservatives get 321 seats and Labour gets 295. Obviously, the Liberals completely collapsed off. They just won seats in outer Scotland and Wales. Obviously pre-Plaid Cymru. And
do you
then
know why that? Do you know why that is? What happened to the Liberals?
why they collapsed?
Because they were a big party, right? I mean,
Hmm.
previously.
I think it was the split, or wasn't it? It was Asquith and Lloyd George split off, and then Lloyd George ended up working with, was it the Conservatives? I believe he worked with them. So that kind of split the Liberal vote off. And then it was just the rise of Labour Party because Labour Party didn't exist. And then working class people couldn't vote once they got the chance to vote. Because when working class people couldn't vote, it was
Yeah,
just posh people with posh people on the right or posh people on the left. So it's like, so the Liberals were the posh people on the left. And then when the working class vote came in, that kind of fell more to Labour.
yeah.
I just,
Okay.
I mean, I think it's going to change now. I can see the Conservative Party and Labour Party being destroyed soon because I can see them being squeezed by Greens and by Reform and Lib Dems holding the centre ground. But we'll see. I think we're heading towards elections, which will be like 2020, 2020, and then God knows what kind of government we'll end up with. So the problem is the system went that under proportional representation, Labour would have won this election. So the 1948 Representation of the People Act had meant Labour needed 2% more votes for the same number of seats, and that is the difference. You know what I mean? As in they needed those extra votes. So that law really affected Labour. Without that law and without the electoral system, they wouldn't have been able to do it. And there was the Liberal Party decline. So the vote fell from 2.6 million to 730,556. And the Liberals did not even contest every seat. So they were kind of on their deathbed now. They kind of resurrect in the 70s, obviously, when both Conservatives and Labour are so awful that people when it's like, oh God, Wilson again, Heath again, or the person who's trying to kill his ex-lover. It's like the country, God knows the country was awful in the 70s. Yeah, so you've got these three factors. So of them, I would say that for me, I think the electoral system is the most important, purely because the Labour Party won more votes. So if it wasn't for that electoral
Yeah,
system, under any other kind of electoral system, they would have won the 51 election. I think you can make the case for the others if you really want to, but I think like the fact that Labour weakness, yes, they were really, really weak, but they still won the most number of votes. So that's the key thing. So even despite those weaknesses, they still won more votes than Conservatives. So how weak were they really? And the Conservative Party, despite all their strength, still got less votes. And so it's only because of the electoral system that the Conservatives won it. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Although if I was going to, I think you can make a case, I guess, for the other factors
You
too.
can. Do you want to make a case for
Um,
one of the others?
I think the strongest one would be the divided Labor being divided and the Conservatives being more cohesive and also adopting the welfare state, continuing those policies
Yeah,
from
I think
Attlee's.
I think definitely
Um,
adopting the definitely important that they adopted the post-war consensus. I don't think it happens without that.
because it's not as if, even though they're at a disadvantage with the electoral system,
Yeah.
it's not that it was impossible for them to win
Yeah.
in other circumstances.
No.
Um, so
No,
it is a
you could
combination of
argue,
factors. So
yeah. One of my students argued that if
yeah,
Labour weren't so weak, they would have won even with that electoral system because they've done it before.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's the division, that having a divided party and having two factions,
Yeah.
left and right, that are unable to put together really a coherent um, front.
Yeah.
That's quite important.
Yeah. I always say to
Um,
my students, if in doubt on any election on the Britain one, just go Labour Party was divided between the left and the right.
oh, dude. Okay, so that was my instinct
Yeah,
to
it's
say that.
universally true every election, every place. It's like Labour Party is divided. Even now under Starmer with Corbyn right wing, like there's just that party is just
Yeah, yeah,
divided.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas the
Okay.
Conservatives were totally united, I think, until Europe. Europe started splitting them in the 90s, really, and since then they've been
Right,
divided.
right.
But they are more obsessed with winning power. But yeah, okay, we're going mostly with that one. All right, the next one then is like, why were the Conservatives able to dominate British politics for so long? So
Yeah,
I'll do this stuff. So I've split this one into economic, social, and political. I think these are the obvious categories for this one in terms of doing it. So in terms of economic, there was economic growth all the way through the 50s. So there was a rise in living standards. People, living standards improved. There was a boom. It was the same in the United States in the 50s. So it's like, the whole global economy was buzzing. Post World War II boom, obviously a lot of stuff growing, a lot of investment in infrastructure, and a lot of stuff coming in. So I think that makes a massive difference. More global trade after the Korean War. So obviously Britain being a free market economic country means that they're going to benefit a lot from that. But wages rose faster than prices. So obviously they've got more disposable income. That's really significant because I think most people vote on the micro level. So when people are deciding how good the economy is, they really mean how good do I feel economically? So I
yeah,
don't think many people really look and go, oh, how's the macro economy doing in our country?
yeah. There's a really good stat here that there was a 500% rise in car ownership
Yeah,
during that period,
yeah,
and TVs
yeah,
at
yeah.
500%. That's
Yeah,
enormous.
yeah, and more white goods in general, so that domestic life is being saved, more washing machines, more dishwashers, more of stuff. So all these things were making life much easier for people. So I mean, if you feel like if your wages are going up higher than prices are, you can buy more stuff. You're able to a lot more stuff is available. It's becoming cheaper. American mass market, and like mass manufacturing is coming into to credit. More credits available for people to borrow as well. So for the first time, ordinary people are able to take credit, which means they can actually, buy cars or buy stuff on credit, which they wouldn't have been able to do before.
You'll go on holidays.
Yeah.
Think of
Beginnings of
that.
holidays start happening in the 50s. That's
Imagine
obviously
that.
more middle class thing, whereas the white good stuff is affecting even the poor working class.
Where do you know where people went on holidays to? Was it to Europe, or maybe it was just to Brighton, to the
I
beach
think it
down
would have
there?
been Europe, but about before the Eurostar was around, I don't think it was massively different to fly to America than it was to fly to Europe for us because we're an island, so we were kind of trapped there. But I'm not going to back that.
Yeah.
My
Okay.
family went to Switzerland, obviously, because my dad's half Swiss. My mum went nowhere. So she never went on holidays. If they went on holiday, it was in England. So I think a lot of the holidays would have still been a bit domestic rather than foreign in the 50s.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
people have got the money to do stuff. And it's just like, you feel like everything's growing. Um,
Yeah.
and it, key is the global economy shrank. The share of global economy for the British economy shrank from 25% to 15%, which and inflation, unemployment proved difficult to solve as well. They couldn't really fix it. Keynesian economics didn't really fix inflation at all. But it didn't. Inflation doesn't really matter if your wages are going up faster than it. If that makes sense, because it's like
Yeah.
because that's why I don't think they really cared about inflation as much. And Italy and Germany grew by more, so you can already see the problems and the limitations here
Yeah.
of
That's
that
right.
Britain, this is unsustainable and that Britain's going to be whacked. But I don't think anyone, the ordinary person's going to be like, oh, I can buy a TV. They're not going to go, oh my God, the British global economy GDP shares dropped from 25% to 15%. How
That's right.
terrible. Like no one is going to, unless you're an economist or you're not going to care.
It's
So
interesting though that British prosperity is considerably less than. I mean, it is prospering slowly, but its growth is much less than Europe, even
yeah,
Germany.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
think
yeah.
of Germany,
That's where like
post-war Germany.
Wilson,
So
when he comes in 64, says it was 13 wasted years. He was like the
yeah,
Conservatives were cruising off like you know,
off that.
macro economy
Yeah,
was running really well and doing nothing to look at the long-term viability of the economy.
yeah,
Which, to be
yeah.
fair, I don't think
Interesting.
anyone does until Thatcher. I don't think anyone. They're just like, oh well. It's like we've not had good economic leaders in this country.
Yeah,
I'm not even
yeah,
sure we did in the Empire times, to be honest. They were just free. I think Britain's just always freeloaded off the fact that it has a global economy, free for trade, and more productive elements of its empire and around the world on the side, but from mercantile.
yeah, yeah.
There's
It's
never been
interesting
any
though.
need to reform. Yeah.
It's interesting though in the economic policy how left wing the Conservative Party looks at this period. I
Yeah.
mean, the Keynesian economics,
Yeah.
the attempt to control inflation using interest rates, import
Yeah.
controls,
Yeah.
trying this sort of pulling the levers in order to control
Yeah.
economic growth or to stop inflation,
Yeah.
slow down inflation. All of this seems very familiar, right?
Yeah, but it will do. It's Attlee's world.
So
So it is left-wing economics because it's Attlee's economics. Until
yeah.
until Thatcher changes it, everyone is operating with this left-wing economics. So
So there wasn't any kind of concerted opposition to this
no,
mentality, the economic mentality.
well, no, but how was it
It's
working in the
just
50s? Everything was going really well. They just didn't realize that because the macro economy of the world was working really well. Everyone was profiting, so why would you care? Like that's what I mean. It's like that's why Wilson was like, no one dealt with it. It's not that he dealt with it much better either, but like it's like at least he
yeah,
recognized that no one was doing anything with it.
yeah,
No, the
yeah,
first prime minister to really challenge this is Heath. But he
yeah.
backs down because if you get inflation down, you raise unemployment. And the whole obsession with Britain in the Keynesian economics
That's is
post-World
that
War,
is employment.
yeah, was
Yeah,
employment. Like, so they were like, we don't care about inflation. We just want everyone to have a job, not realizing how much that's crippling the economy over the long term. So, and
yeah,
Heath does
yeah,
it. All the stuff that Thatcher wasn't revolutionary. Everything she implemented, Heath had done. It's just once unemployment started going up, Heath backed out and U-turned on absolutely everything. Whereas
yeah,
Thatcher plowed through it. And to be absolutely honest, without the Falklands War, I'm not sure she'd have got the chance to really put it through after 83.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, well, she was also lucky that Labour was run by Michael Foot, and it was totally unelectable in 1983. So there was no chance they were going to win with their awful policies. Like, it's the reason why the manifesto in 1983 is called the longest suicide note in history. Uh, it's like, well, we'll get onto that when we get to Thatcher in 2 weeks' time. But yeah, so
okay,
the economy's running, but the question is how much credit goes to the Tories? Not a lot. They weren't really doing anything on this. I think it's pretty much the private sector and the macro economy in America that's driving all of this. It's just Britain's riding the wave of goodness, which is why when the wave crashes, they don't know what to do because they don't actually know
yeah.
how to run an economy.
Well, yeah. I mean, so to jump to anticipate a little bit.
Sorry, I just want to say Rab Butler did a pretty good job as Chancellor, but the rest of them didn't seem to know what they were doing. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
So, in a sense, if I was going to answer this question, why
yeah.
were Conservatives able to dominate British politics for so long?
But we have to give the other two
I
candidates
think.
first.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Okay, I'm jumping too far
Yeah,
ahead,
cool. Then
but
I'll let you
but,
answer
but,
it. But
but
yeah,
not
let's
jumping.
go.
Okay, yeah,
I mean, it's obviously we're going through like, yeah, we know why, but like we have to. So socially, obviously, there were some good social policies. They increased spending on well. Again, if you looked at this, you'd be like, this is a conservative government, but you know what I mean? They're just following
yeah,
on
yeah,
from Attlee's one. So this is why it's like, but that's why everyone would say now, if you look at Blair and Starmer, are they really left-wing governments or are they just following Thatcherism, more or less following Thatcherism? I think we're in
So it's
Thatcher.
kind of the reverse. It's like a mirror image.
Yeah, we're in Thatcher's world
Mm.
now, but now Thatcher's economics is not starting to work. You know what I mean? Because it's like the world changes and you need to change your economic system at some point.
Mm.
We can't just rely on mercantilism for 300 years like we used to. So social, they increase spending on welfare, which is mental. But again, that neutralizes the Labour Party because if they're spending more money on welfare, what are Labour offering? What can Labour offer
Yeah,
against this? They're
Yeah,
neutralizing
yeah,
absolutely everything. The only thing they can offer is
yeah,
so radical, batshit mental left-wing policies that no one's going to want them. They built more houses. Like Macmillan literally built more than 300,000. I mean, when has there ever been a government that built more houses than they promised? It's always
yeah,
less.
yeah,
And Macmillan
yeah,
actually delivered, I think, nearly 100,000 more houses than he promised as houses.
yeah,
They changed
yeah,
the education system. They built the first comprehensive schools, which were initially opposed. So again, allowing more working class people to access education. To be honest, I think
yeah,
most of the best education reforms in this country have come from the right, ironically. Like for poorer people, it's like the left tend to come up with crappy policies. They built 6,000 new schools and 11 universities. But again, yes, this is something you would see from the left, but the right wing has always been wants meritocracy, wants drive, wants success, because not because they really give a crap about working class people succeeding, but because productive working class people make the economy much better and the country much more successful. So it's going to be in their interest to do it. And then the 1957 Homicide Act moved towards ending the death penalty. That was symbolic. That's a bit like the Clause 4 moment for Labour. Like it's showing again that this is no longer a nasty right-wing conservative party, and they do generally care about the people in general. Um, but then obviously like the limitations to this were the welfare state and growing affluence had limited class distinctions. So there was no longer so much of a class distinction, but that is in the Tories' interest because generally the wealthier people are, the more likely they are to vote conservative. So it's in their interest to raise at least a certain proportion of the working class up into the middle class to get them into that position. So I think all of those social policies are basically, if you took that in isolation and said which party introduced all this,
that's right.
you'd probably say it was Labour.
Oh, I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I think so.
And then the last one is the political ones, which is obviously like Macmillan's catchphrases, like Super Mac, he was coined as well, and his quite phrase like "never had it so good" and "life is better under the Conservatives." Because again, what do they remember from Labour? The last Labour government had devalued the pound in 1949, which was bad for the economy. They remember Labour being of rationing and like hardship, and this Conservative Party is all of booming economy. People are getting everything they want, better food, better like more food, like better standards, holidays, like cars. If you're doing that, why would you change? Because what's Labour
Mm.
going to offer? They're already doing the post-war consensus. So Labour just goes, "Hey, we'll do the same thing." Well, if it's working, why would you change? The Conservatives had their like textbook playbook that they still have today. They cut income tax before the 1955 and 1959 elections and changed leaders just before each election, so it looked like it was fresh, which is quite smart. It didn't work in 64. I think they probably caught on to it the third time they did it.
Yeah, yeah.
But and they met their targets of over 300. In fact, everything they said they would do in the 51 election, they did. And I think that's the key. If you want another term, you have to deliver on what you said you're going to do. So, like they said they would build the houses, they built them. They said they would bring in red meat, they did it. They said they would, they said they would bring in more like a better economy for the people, and they did it. So, I think in general, people were quite happy because they got what they wanted to do and what they voted for. But if you're looking at limitations again, it's the same idea that it's luck more than anything. Government expenditure on defense rather than growth. So they said they wasted 13 years because the empire by this point, it was kind of obvious it was coming to an end. And to be fair to Macmillan, he did do his Winds of Change speech in South Africa, where he said that like the empire was going to come to an end. And that's a big speech for conservatives because you couldn't imagine Churchill making the Winds of Change speech on the side. But again, which shows again how much the Conservative Party has transformed in this period. I mean, this in nowadays, if you showed this to people, people wouldn't think of this as what the modern Tory party is.
Mm.
Priority to maintain a strong pound because Attlee had devalued it. So again, it was the Conservatives' bread and butter is to be, strong on the economy. Invested overseas rather than at home, so that was limiting because people again they were kind of wondering why aren't you investing more in domestic stuff than in the empire, which was on its way out. Butzkelism was coined, so which was basically like again the economic policy was like Labour before, as it kept the post-war consensus. So again, the Butzkelism meant that basically the right wing of Labour and the left wing of the Conservatives were the same. So if they're offering just the same, you neutralize all of Labour's arguments because you're not allowing them to go. But the big weakness for them on political stuff was stop-go economics. As it was just basically they were just responding to inflation. So they were responding. So if the economy overheated, they cut it down, and then they put it up, and they cut it down. So there was no real economic strategy in this. So there was no real leadership. It was kind of like autopiloting through a good time. It's like when you're sailing a boat and the sea is really calm, so you don't really need to put anything on it, and then a storm comes and you're completely unprepared because you've got no skills. And this led to a lot of stagflation, which is obviously a combination of a stagnant economy and inflation, which is kind of what we had a few years ago in Britain, just
Yeah, yeah.
get a good idea of that.
That
Obviously,
sounds familiar.
yeah, yeah, it's what most of Europe and most of the Western world, to be absolutely honest, apart from maybe America, is suffering from at the moment. So yeah, sorry, so those are the economic, political, and social. What do you want to go with? You wanted to,
So if
or did you want to add
following
anything to
it,
those categories, by the way? Sorry.
no, I think that's pretty comprehensive. That's
Yeah,
what I've got.
yeah,
If I was going to, throw a dart at the dartboard,
yeah,
and come up with an argument for this
mhm,
question,
yeah,
I think I would say the Conservatives are lucky. It's
yeah,
the economy.
yeah, yeah,
And